For nearly a century, this massive industrial complex was one of the most important steel-making sites in America. Located in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, its story began in 1857, when the first ironworks were established here. Over the following decades, the operation grew into what became Bethlehem Steel, one of the world's major steel producers. The giant structures seen here are the famous blast furnaces, later known as the steel stacks. These furnaces were not simply abandoned buildings. They were once part of a huge industrial system where iron ore, coke, and limestone were processed at enormous temperatures to produce molten iron. The iron could then be used in the steel-making process. At its height, Bethlehem Steel helped supply materials for some of America's most famous infrastructure and landmarks, including the Golden Gate Bridge, Hoover Dam, Chrysler Building, and parts of the Empire State Building. The company also played a major role in shipbuilding and wartime production. For generations, the Bethlehem plant was more than a factory. It was a major source of employment and a central part of life in the Lehigh Valley. At its peak, the Bethlehem operation ran around the clock and employed more than 30,000 people. But America's steel industry eventually faced intense competition, changing technology, and major economic pressures. Bethlehem Steel struggled through decades of decline. Then, in 1995, the furnaces at Bethlehem finally went silent. The last cast at the Bethlehem plant took place on November 18, 1995. The company itself continued for several more years, before filing for bankruptcy in 2001 and ultimately disappearing as a corporation. Yet the story of Bethlehem Steel did not completely end. Instead of destroying the historic blast furnaces, parts of the site were preserved. Today, these enormous structures remain standing as steel stacks, a powerful reminder of America's industrial past. The 5 surviving blast furnaces stretch roughly 1,100 feet, nearly a quarter of a mile, and the 2 largest rise more than 230 feet into the sky. What was once a place filled with fire, machinery, trains, and thousands of workers is now a preserved historic landmark and cultural destination. *** Steel Stacks is more than an abandoned factory. It is the surviving skeleton of an industrial empire and a reminder of how quickly America's manufacturing landscape can change. But what actually happened inside these enormous structures? The answer begins with the blast furnaces. At Bethlehem Steel, the furnaces were the heart of iron production. Raw materials including iron ore, coke, and limestone were fed into the furnace. Extremely hot air was blasted into the system, creating the intense heat needed to produce molten iron. The scale was enormous. At peak operation, Bethlehem's 5 surviving furnaces were part of a much larger complex. The furnaces could produce roughly 2,600 to 3,000 tons of iron per day each. The oldest surviving furnace, known as Furnacer, dates to 1915, but these furnaces were only one part of the operation. Railroads brought raw materials into the plant, while the nearby Lehigh River and extensive rail network helped make the location ideal for moving materials and finished products, and the steel produced here traveled far beyond Bethlehem. Bethlehem Steel supplied material from major American structures, including the Golden Gate Bridge, Hoover Dam, Chrysler Building, and parts of the Empire State Building. The company also produced ships and military equipment during the World Wars. For the workers, this wasn't simply a factory, it was an entire way of life. At its peak, the Bethlehem plant operated around the clock and employed more than 30,000 people. For generations, families in the region depended on the steel industry. Then came the decline. After more than a century of steel production at the site, the final furnaces were shut down. November 18, 1995, marked the last operation of the Bethlehem blast furnaces. The noise disappeared, the furnaces stopped glowing, and an enormous industrial site was left behind. But instead of allowing these historic structures to disappear completely, Bethlehem eventually found a new purpose for them, and that transformation is where the story of steel stacks really begins. When Bethlehem Steel finally closed its plant in 1995, the silence was enormous. For more than a century, this site had been a center of American industry. Now, thousands of workers had lost their jobs, and a huge industrial landscape stood largely empty. But Bethlehem did something unusual. Instead of simply tearing down the blast furnaces, the community began looking for a way to preserve them and give the site a new future. The 5 surviving furnaces became the centerpiece of Steel Stacks, a Tenoka arts and cultural campus. The first furnace dates back to 1915, while the 2 largest rise more than 230 feet high. Together, the structures stretch about 1,100 feet, almost a quarter of a mile. Then, in 2011, a new chapter officially began. The former steel site was transformed into a destination for music, art, education, festivals, and community events. The industrial ruins were no longer just symbols of a vanished industry, they became part of Bethlehem's cultural identity. Today, visitors can stand beneath the enormous furnaces and see the same structures that once powered one of America's major steelmaking operations. The machinery is quiet, the furnaces are cold, but the story is still alive. Steel Stack stands as a reminder that even when an industry disappears, its history doesn't have to disappear with it. What was once a place of fire, iron, and steel has become a place of history, culture, and remembrance. This is Steel Stacks, where America's industrial past still towers over its future.